Hey y'all, so today I'm going to answer the question, can nonprofit board members be paid? Let's get into it. Hey y'all, this is Tiffany with Boss on a Budget. I help new and small nonprofits get up and running. If you need help starting your nonprofit, subscribe to this channel. There are a bunch of videos on my channel that will be helpful for you, and I drop a video every week. So let's talk about this question. Can nonprofit board members be paid? And it's an easy answer to the question. The answer is yes, they can. But you have to remember that when we talk about nonprofits, we're talking about a lot of different types of organizations. So there are nonprofit hospitals, there are colleges and universities that are nonprofits, and also some foundations are nonprofits. So that's a very broad word, which could cover a span of a lot of different organizations. And so when you're comparing yourself to those people, you have to keep that in mind, which is why this answer is a yes and a but. So there are nonprofits that do pay their board members. They pay them because they're trying to attract a certain amount of talent or they're trying to attract people with a certain skill set. And these are nonprofits that typically have major budgets, like in the millions. So that's really not the right question. The real question for you as a new or a small nonprofit is, should you be paying your board members? And to that question, I say no. No, you should not be paying your board members, especially if you're small and you're new, because think about it. Like the number one challenge that I hear from new nonprofits is funding. They are literally scrambling to figure out how to make money and how to be sustainable. So when you're in that development, kind of trying to get where you want to be, why would you then start paying out for people who you're trying to get to fundraise and whose networks you're trying to leverage so you can make more money? And then when you think about the optics, so when I say optics, I mean like your donors, the people in the community who are looking at you and watching you, and they see that as you're asking for donations, you're then giving those donations, some of that, to your board members. It just doesn't sit right with a lot of people. So you really have to keep that in mind when you're thinking about making those decisions. Keep watching to the end of this video because I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can be paid if you're a nonprofit founder and what you need to do. But I do want to talk about kind of get under the question, should nonprofit board members be paid? Because there's a lot more to that question than what's on the surface. And I see this dilemma a lot where you as the founder and your board, or maybe just you're literally doing the work. You're like, Tiffany, I literally see clients. I provide the services. I'm the one on the ground day to day. Why can't I get paid? I'm actually doing the work of the organization. So are you saying that I should never be paid? That I should always be a volunteer even though I'm doing all the work? And the answer to that question just means you need to understand the phases of a nonprofit and how to really deal with staff versus board. Okay, so one thing you have to remember is that nonprofits go through developmental phases, just like we have babies, like infants to toddlers, then it's to preschool, whatever that is. It's the same thing with nonprofits. So in your startup years, your board really is doing everything. In your regular stage, if you're an adult as a nonprofit, your board and your staff should be separate. Your board does not deal with day to day operations. They don't regularly interface with clients. They do not do services. Your board sets the strategy. They try to figure out sustainability in terms of having money coming into the organization. They handle the operational budget. They handle the big stuff, right? The big picture things. Staff actually execute. They help execute those plans and the strategy that the board has decided on. There is a clear line between what a board and a staff member should be doing. So in that phase that you're thinking about, yes, board members are separate. They're not doing the work, so they shouldn't be paid, right? But as staff, because they are doing the work and they're interfacing with clients, yes, they should be paid for the efforts that they're putting forth. But in your startup phase, when you're in your infant stage, you are one and the same. Board and staff are typically one and the same. We call them working boards. They're doing everything. And you just have to come to the realization that in the beginning, that's just what it is. Even if you are standing in the place of staff and you are an official board member, you should not be getting paid. What you should be doing is setting a path so eventually there can be a line of separation. And eventually, if you on the board or anyone else wants to transition to staff, then you do that. You put that in place. But the board has to make that decision, and whoever they decide to hire can't be a part of that decision. And if it's you as the founder who wants to transition to the executive director, that's fine. But the board needs to make that decision. The board needs to hire you, and they set your pay and they do your performance review and all of that. But just remember that traditionally staff and board are completely different. That's why it makes so much sense that board members shouldn't get paid, because they shouldn't be doing what staff do. But in the beginning, like I said, you are a working board, and a lot of times you are doing that work. So what you should be focused on is, how can we get to a point where we're making enough money where we can separate that? We can have a board member do what they need to do, and we have enough money to start paying staff, and we can get rolling. So I wanted to give you some suggestions for how do you transition to being able to pay staff members, and how can you do that in a way that's sustainable, right? So I'm going to do a separate video on this, but I just want to offer some pointers. First things first, you have to write it in your budget. You have to understand how much money you want to pay out in staffing cost. Who are the staff that you want to pay? What are their roles? What's the division of responsibility in the organization? And you have to be able to then track that to what their pay will be. So is it $20,000 for the year? Is it $50,000? Whatever it is, you have to write it in the budget, because what doesn't get written down or declared, it just does not happen. So the very first step is to put it in your budget, so you have an idea in your mind that as a board, you have to raise that money as a part of the entire budget to be able to cover your operations. Staffing is just as important as materials or insurance or rent or anything else. So you have to write it in your budget so you know in your mind you have to cover it. The second thing you need to think about is, what are the diverse set of income sources that will cover those salaries? So don't just rely on a grant. Don't just rely on one thing. What are you as a board going to decide to do to kind of cover that salary? And it should be a range of things. So if you are using a grant to cover salaries, just remember to write yourself into the grant. So if you're an executive director and you're managing the program, that's staffing that should go into the grant. If you're an executive director actually providing services to clients, you should be in the grant as well, because you are the staff person providing the direct services, just like any other staff members. The other piece of this is, what are other income sources that can also cover your salary, so you're not scrambling at the end of the year or when a grant is done and you can't pay payroll. So one strategy is set up a monthly giving program. Identify 20 people who give $100 a month, and that's $2,000 a month. That will help pay salary, and that's money that you know is pretty much coming every month, because people have committed to saying, I'm going to give to this organization every single month. So in your mind, think about ways that you can create sustainable funding sources so that you're never ever scrambling to pay payroll. One thing I'll say that I forgot to mention earlier is that board members can be reimbursed for regular things that happen as a result of their board service. So they can be reimbursed for travel or mileage costs. They can be reimbursed for food or printing or things or expenses that are incurred as a result of their board service. There's nothing wrong with reimbursing board members for that as a regular business expense. If you want to contract out to a board member to do something like your accounting, or you want them to be your realtor to find a building or something like that, you have to be very, very mindful of conflict of interest, right? So the IRS requires that you indicate if there are any conflicts of interest that exist within your board. And if you are hiring a board member to do something, that is a direct conflict of interest. So you need to declare that in your filings with the IRS. You need to disclose that every year, and you need to have a process in place to make sure that there were no unfair decision making in deciding who the board was. So that could be that board member doesn't participate in voting whether or not they are used. That means you get at least 3 people where you're looking at their estimates before you make a decision. There are a lot of things you can do to mitigate the conflict, but you have to acknowledge that a conflict exists, and you have to take the steps to make sure that there are no ongoing conflicts or no issues moving forward. So I hope that was helpful. Please visit me at www.bossonabudget.com if you need help starting up your nonprofit, and I will see you in the next video.